Hello everyone, my name is Jason Thomas and I hope this video finds you well. Thank you for taking the time to listen to my lecture recital, and I hope that you find this topic as interesting as I have found it. Today I will be discussing the evolution of the style of George Walker as seen through his piano works. I will be discussing 5 piano pieces, which are his Prelude and Caprice, Spatials, Spektra, Guido's Hand, and his 5th piano sonata. Some of the reasons why I have decided to talk about George Walker are because I love his music and I believe that he is a composer that is deserving of much more recognition. With all that is happening in the world today involving Black lives, I thought it would be good to hear of a Black composer who has earned so many achievements through adversity. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge a few important people. Dr. Polk, who has been the best advisor for my thesis, my teacher Nina Svetlanova for her legendary teaching, my mentor Shoping Chu for his vision, my wife Camille, who has my heart, my mother, whom has been my lifelong supporter, my friends, my church family, and Jesus Christ. To begin, I would like to share with you some biographical information on George Walker. Dr. George Theophilus Walker lived from 1922 to 2018. He was a Black American composer, pianist, organist, and educator with outstanding achievements in his lifetime, including several firsts for the African American race. Some of these firsts include being the first Black composer to receive a Pulitzer Prize, the first instrumentalist to perform in Manhattan's Town Hall, by the way, Black instrumentalist, the first Black instrumentalist to secure major concert management, and the first recipient of a doctoral degree from the Eastman School of Music. As for his education, George Walker graduated from Oberlin College with his bachelor's degree when he was only 18 years old, and he had the highest honors of his class. He was admitted to the Curtis Institute of Music, where he studied piano with Rudolf Serkin and Hrzowski. He also studied composition at Curtis with Rosario Scalero. Scalero taught notable composers such as Samuel Barber, Madaudy, and George Rochberg. He became the first Black graduate from Curtis when he earned his artist diploma in piano and composition. After receiving his doctorate from the Eastman School of Music, he was awarded a Fulbright Fellowship, which allowed him the opportunity to study composition in Paris with Nadia Boulanger. Some of Nadia Boulanger's notable students include Elliott Carter and Aaron Copland and Quincy Jones. In his teaching career, Dr. Walker taught at several colleges, including the Smith College, where he became the first Black tenured faculty member, Rutgers University, where he was appointed chairman of the music department, Peabody Institute of Johns Hopkins University, and the University of Delaware, where he was the recipient of the first minority chair established by the university. Dr. Walker also gave masterclasses in many institutions as well, including Curtis, Oberlin, and Columbia University. Dr. Walker was a prolific composer who earned many awards for his work. He received commissions to compose for major orchestras throughout the world, including the New York Philharmonic, the Cleveland Orchestra, and the Boston Symphony, among many others. Dr. Walker was also awarded 6 honorary doctorate degrees from schools such as Oberlin, Curtis, and others. The Pulitzer Prize in music that he won was for his work Lilacs for voice and orchestra. Another notable fact is that in 1997, the mayor of Washington, D.C., Marion Barry, declared June 17th as George Walker Day. There are many more interesting details about the life of George Walker. For more information, please check out my thesis. Now that we have gone over a bit of who George Walker was, I will now share some information about his style and influences. Dr. George Walker's compositional output consists of more than 90 published works of virtually every medium except for opera. His piano output includes 5 piano sonatas, a sonata for 2 pianos, a piano concerto, and other smaller works, some of which we will discuss later. When listening to the music of George Walker, one would recognize that his style of writing were diverse and have evolved throughout his career. His music has been compared to that of Paul Hindemith, Aaron Copland, and Samuel Barber. Dr. Walker utilized several varying styles in his music, including serialism, neoclassicism, Hindemithyan counterpoint, blues, spirituals, and jazz. He was a progressive composer, and his compositions range from easy listening to complex atonality. His aim as a composer was to be individualistic. George Walker's goals as a composer are best summarized in his own words when he said, "Being able to do something that one hasn't done before and to be satisfied with what one has done is something I can live with and that I understand even though no one else understands it." The evolution of his style can be traced to his early years of composing. During George Walker's time at Oberlin, he was the organist for the Graduate School of Theology and often practiced improvising on the organ. In speaking about his improvisation, he said, "I never wrote down anything. The improvisation was my earliest attempt at exploring harmonic developments that were unusual to conclude. In my music, I think in almost every piece, there's a different type of cadence, so there is a carryover from that." This idea of having a different type of cadence and finding harmonic developments that were unusual to conclude became a staple of the style of George Walker. Another early influence on the style of George Walker came during his senior year at Oberlin, when his composition teacher, Norman Lockwood, introduced him to vocal music of Charles Ives and Stravinsky. The focus of his lessons was to write a single vocal line with an accompaniment. Soon after ending composition lessons at Oberlin, he wrote his first piano piece, Caprice, which we will discuss in detail later. The single line approach, as we will see, is a staple of his style. Another important approach to the style of Dr. Walker was his attention to technique, while the beauty of his music was more of a byproduct. In speaking of his approach with Frank O'Teary, Dr. Walker said, "As a matter of fact, I don't think in terms of creating beauty. I can understand how people may get a little annoyed about the fact that I seem to be more concerned about things like the technical aspect of composition. But I think that is what enables me to find the things that somehow manage to become a part of the fabric that people recognize. As I look back, I think about so many things in almost every work that people do not notice that are very important. If the effect is such that people get a sense that this is beautiful, that's fine. I want to create elegant structures." George Walker's attention to detail was influenced by his teacher Rosario Scalero. In the 3 years that George studied with him, Scalero cultivated in him a work ethic and discipline that guided him throughout his life. Throughout Dr. Walker's career, he mainly utilized traditional formal structures as a framework for his compositions. This concept was reinforced by Scalero's composition assignments. Speaking of Scalero's influence as a teacher, Dr. Walker said, "Composers today don't have teachers who believe in the same way the importance of studying counterpoint and the elements of skill. But I think you need to absorb and understand what other composers have done in the past before you can set about changing and creating something new. What will represent your own voice will come out. Listen to lots of music." Even though the goal of Walker was to have something individual to say, he was appreciative of the compositional exercises he learned from Scalero. George Walker's influences from Nadia and Boulanger were more of confirmations to continue in the direction that he wanted to go. Walker shared the following about his first lesson. "From the outset, Nadia and Boulanger in the very first lesson said, 'You're a composer.' She said, 'Your music has power.' The other composers, Carter and Piston, and all of them, were green about counterpoint and doing harmony. I didn't have to do that. I brought in whatever I wanted and showed it to her. She had nothing to say except, 'Keep going.'" It was evident that Nadia and Boulanger had great respect for the music of Dr. Walker. When asked about the inspiration that he received from Boulanger, he said, "I really don't like the word inspiration. I like very much what Nadia and Boulanger said because I always felt that this was the essence of what people call inspiration. Finding. One finds something. It is discovery. It is a matter of encountering something that provides the genesis to motivate the direction in which you want to go. Dr. Walker's music during this period was evolving. Bullinger's influence encouraged him to expand his harmonic vocabulary in ways that became more chromatic and dissonant. So this has been a little insight into the style of George Walker. Next, we will explore how his piano music evolved throughout his career. When considering the evolution of the style of Dr. George Walker, a good starting point would be to examine his first composition. In his last semester as a student of Oberlin, George Walker composed his first piano piece, the Caprice. The prelude that accompanies the Caprice was written for Walker's debut recital in Town Hall, New York City, in 1945. The Prelude and Caprice is Dr. Walker's first published piece. As mentioned before, Dr. Walker's aim as a composer was individuality. He achieved this through the expansion of harmony and the innovations of forms. The innovation of form is a staple of the style of George Walker, and it is a trait that has evolved through his career. In an interview with David Baker, George Walker was asked about his view on form in his compositions. Dr. Walker stated, "I have really been a strong advocate of traditional forms simply because they provide stability to a work. The moment one ventures into a less well-defined organizational procedure, one creates the possibility of a dangerous imbalance. In my works, I have tried to mix up structures which adhere to classical or Baroque concepts and have treated these structures somewhat freely. Although the basic aspects of these forms are still evident, I keep coming back to traditional forms because they provide a base from which I can incorporate new and more contemporary content into my music. I can also create more deviations than one would normally associate with the more classical aspects of these forms." George Walker's Prelude highlights his philosophy on form exactly. The Prelude is 44 measures long, and it has 3 main sections in ABA form. I have created a chart that shows Walker's unique approach to form. Here, we can notice his unusual form. From this chart, we can notice that there is a standard 2 and 4 bar phrases. However, in the first section, there is a 7 bar phrase which is only balanced at the end of music. In addition, there is a 14 bar phrase which contains the climax of the music in the middle section. These are examples of innovation of form for Dr. Walker. When asked about his views on his melodies and harmonies, Dr. Walker stated, "My pieces are intended to be melodic in a freely singable sense without being conventional in either a diatonic or chromatic sense. I don't have any preconceived ideas of what I'm trying to do harmonically, partially because I have a strong tendency to think linearly." Although this statement was about a composition he wrote later in his life, this philosophy applies to his Prelude. This practice is a branch from his single-line approach as discussed earlier. This Prelude is set primarily in a choral style, and it features melodic lines that intertwine throughout the music. The main melody in the beginning is in the alto voice marked with tenuti. The soprano line has a repeated note motif that is like compositions of romantic composers such as Chopin and his Scherzo No. 1. Notice the similarities. And now Chopin. Harmonically, this music is mostly diatonic, with one instance of the B pentatonic mode towards the end. What is interesting about the harmony is that the complete tonic chord is delayed until the last measure. The arrangement of the first chord is an open fifth that creates an empty sound. This idea of openness is seen throughout the music. The penultimate and final measures contain the first full tonic chord. What is non-traditional about this prelude is that the key of B major is a half step higher than the key of the caprice that follows. The caprice is defined as a lively, loosely structured musical composition that is often humorous in character. Caprices are known for being fast and virtuosic. George Walker's Caprice fits this definition perfectly. The music contains some unexpected twists and turns. It also features characteristics that can be seen in his mature style, such as ambiguity of key and frequent meter changes. The Caprice is 95 measures long. The music is virtually a continuous display of 16th notes with two themes that appear in unexpected places. The first theme, which appears in the beginning measures, appears twice more before the music ends in triple forte. What is unusual about this caprice are the changes of meter. The music is mostly in 3/8, but has instances of 4/8, 5/8, and 6/8. This is a characteristic of later pieces of Dr. Walker. In a discussion with David Baker about his approach to rhythm, Dr. Walker said, "Conductors regard me with a certain amount of vehement displeasure because of my meter changes. Complaints, for example, have been registered about the meter structure of the first movement of the Address for Orchestra. After the introduction, the fugue begins in 3/8 and then goes to 4/8, 5/8, 6/8. That's really part of the structure of the fugue itself. My fascination with linearity has led me to become interested in a free kind of meter that often ends up being irregular." Although this statement applies to a piece written much later, this idea of meter changes as a result of focusing on linearity is found in his first piece. Regarding Walker's ambiguity of key, the key signature of the Caprice contains 5 flats. However, it is unclear what the key is throughout the music because there is not a cadence until the end. The music starts with an E flat minor chord in the first measure, and the second measure is a D flat major 6/4 chord. What follows are various keys, including moments of F major, B flat minor, and even moments of E minor. The final chord of the music is B flat major, which was unexpectedly approached by an A flat dominant 7th chord. This withholding of the B flat chord until the final bars is in connection with the prelude. The harmonic progression of this music shows the philosophy of Dr. Walker's approach in that he created harmonic developments that were unusual to conclude, as discussed earlier. The music also features much chromaticism, which is a staple for Walker's approach. I will now perform the Prelude and Caprice. The Prelude and Caprice of George Walker is a beautiful and wonderful display of music that shows the unique qualities of his compositional approach. It features his dedication to style and staying true to established forms while showcasing his modern harmonic touch and desire to stand out as an individualistic composer. The 1960s marked the time that George Walker had fully established himself as a prominent musician, and that he was a successful pianist, composer, and educator. By 1960, he finished all his major studies, including composition lessons with Nadia Boulanger, and was set to do what his heart dictated. During this time, Dr. Walker's music became more atonal, with two representative works of this period being Spatials and Spektra. Dr. Walker had a fascination for composing variations throughout his career, with Spatials being unique in that it was a set of 12-tone variations. Spatial is defined as something related to space. However, George Walker did not intend for his music to reference outer space. With his aim to strive for uniqueness, his approach to the term spatial was different. In speaking about Spatials, Dr. Walker said, "The variation form has always fascinated me because it provides a challenge to move away from the basic concept established in the 18th and 19th centuries, not of embellishing a melody like most people think, but of following the function of the bass line, to the point where each variation is a separate entity. The title is not an extra musical reference to space, it is about the spacing, the disposition of chords and sounds." George Walker developed an interest in 12-tone music after listening to an LP recording of the Berg Violin Concerto. George Walker felt that there were limitations to 12-tone music and wanted to prove to himself that he could write a strict 12-tone piece that was pleasing to the ear. In speaking of his approach with Spatials, he mentioned that, "Spatials represents another aspect of my interest in variations. There are also rhythmic elements and the use of clusters that are as important as the concentration on a strict employment of the 12-tone technique. The rhythmic qualities in the disjunct writing that encompasses every octave of the keyboard require an athleticism on the part of the pianist that is not to be found in Stravinsky or Berg. The Webern variations for piano are essentially placid." We can see in this again that there has been a steady focus on individuality in Dr. Walker's approach. Spatials is based on a 12-tone row, which Dr. Walker calls the statement. What follows are 6 variations that are based on the original statement. The order of the row is as follows: C sharp, E, B flat, C, E flat, A, G sharp, F sharp, F, D, B, and G. In this piece, George Walker utilized a wide range of registers on the piano in presenting the row. George Walker used an overlapping approach for the row throughout the music. An example of this can be seen in the opening measures, where the first note of the row, C sharp, is repeated within the chord that the row ends. What is also interesting to note is that the second instance of the row does not have an F natural, and instead has a G natural in its place in bar 3. This pattern of omitted notes from the row can be seen throughout each of the variations as well. Another pattern that can be seen throughout the variations is not ending each section on the last note of the row. These are examples of George Walker doing the unexpected with traditional forms. Variation 1 is fast and is based on the retrograde of the prime row, or R0, which is the original row in reverse order. It also features a broad range of the piano. For a full list of the rows used for each variation, please refer to my thesis. Another feature that is a staple of the style of George Walker can be seen in Variation 2, and that is his approach to sonorities. The sustaining of large intervals, as seen in measure 28, are features that are also seen in his later works. Here's how it sounds. One last feature of spatials that is worth mentioning is the frequency of meter changes, similar to what we have seen in the Caprice. As in its earlier styles of writing, this piece contains frequent meter changes that support the great variety of rhythm. The following is a chart that shows the frequency of meter changes throughout each section of spatials. As we can see, there is a meter change for nearly every measure of the music. And now, I will perform spatials. Ten years after composing Spatials, Dr. Walker composed Spektra. Spektra is unique in that it was intended to be a free-sounding atonal piece without time signature and bar lines. Dr. Walker said of this piece, "I wrote Spektra with the idea of creating a scintillating quality which would suggest flashes of light and color. There is also the idea of impulse, of unpredictability, and changing constantly the register of the instrument. The word spectra is related to the word spectrum, which is the distribution of colors produced when white light is dispersed by a prism or a diffraction grating. Spectra is the perfect word to describe this music. Spectra features three distinctive motives throughout the piece, which are sustained sonorities, repeated notes, and tremolos. Mixed in between these ideas are displays of free atonality. It is the sustained sonorities and the color of sound created that gives the impression of white light flashing through a prism and observing the colors, and thus the reason for the name spectra. Notice the similarities between the light shining through the prism and the opening phrase of Spectra. The opening arpeggio followed by the sustaining chords and the repeated notes gives the impression of the light creating a spectrum. Examples of this can be seen throughout this piece. This type of writing is an evolution of his improvisatory style while he was an organist at Oberlin, where he would explore harmonic developments that were unusual to conclude, as discussed earlier. Each of these sustained chords functions as an unusual cadence. Here is Spectra. From the 1980s until his passing in 2018 marks a period when Dr. Walker had been recognized as a distinguished composer and musician. Since 1982, George Walker received honorary doctorate degrees from 6 different colleges. He was inducted into the Washington Music Hall of Fame in 2002, received the Aaron Copland ASCAP Award in 2012, and the prestigious Pulitzer Prize. Dr. Walker's compositional output during this time consisted mostly of songs and orchestral works. The last 2 solo piano pieces he wrote during this time were Guido's Hand and the Piano Sonata No. 5. Guido's Hand is the penultimate piano solo composition of George Walker. The title of the music pays homage to the 11th century monk Guido of Arezzo, who is credited for being the pioneer of the Guidonian hand. The Guidonian hand was used as a guide for singers to learn intervals. The hand was based on Guido's psalmization of syllables, which were written on the left hand and meant to be read in a counterclockwise spiral. The reference to the Guidonian hand may be because of the music's cyclical form. Guido's Hand is a 5-movement suite. Guido's Hand features many of the established patterns of George Walker, including atonality, absence of meter, and frequent register changes. The first movement of the suite functions as a prelude. It contains the elements that are the basis for the whole suite: meterless, atonal, and the main theme that reoccurs throughout the movements. Harmonically, this music is based on the octatonic scale, which is an 8-note scale composed of alternating whole and half steps. The octatonic scale has no key center, making it an atonal scale. A glimpse into the thought process of utilizing the octatonic scale can be seen in Dr. Walker's interview with Dennis Leonard Bowe. Dennis asked, "You say that you take a series of notes and build them into musical events. I have found a consistent use of a series of notes which alternates between ascending whole and half steps. Was this deliberate?" To which George replies, "It's been pointed out before, so perhaps there is some truth to it. I've always been concerned about how to write melodically and to write in such a way that it doesn't produce an obvious result, and apparently this is something that I have just hit upon. I was trying very hard to find a way of writing lyrically." In the first movement, the octatonic scale is primarily used until it reaches its climax in measure 8. Then, there is a shift to a more chromatic approach. With the use of tenuto signs, it is evident that there is an emphasis on the melodic clarity of each line. The second movement features mostly fast triplet patterns and large intervals. Utilizing the full range of the piano is a staple of George Walker's compositional style. This movement is also atonal and makes use of the octatonic scale. It also contains some motives from the first movement. In the third movement, there are 3 key features: the silence between notes while a single melody is sustained, dotted rhythms, and sonorities. The opening measures are written in the style of a recitative. The music opens with a fast melodic passage, followed by a staccato chord with the melody being sustained. Midway through the movement, there is a più mosso section. It features running triplets similar to the second movement. The triplet section transitions into a virtuosic octave section. This octave section is an example of the sonorities that are often found in the music of George Walker. The fourth movement features another important staple of the style of George Walker, incorporating popular tunes in his music. In an interview with Mickey Thomas Terry, George Walker was asked about the aspects of American culture that have influenced his music. Dr. Walker responded by saying, "Jazz and popular music, to a very limited extent. These are extensions of my musical background from a home filled with the music of Beethoven, Brahms, Mozart, Chopin, folk songs from all countries, spirituals, and hymns. I have found that I can draw upon these sources in a very subtle way, incorporating snippets rather than recognizable segments of music." In the fourth movement of Guido's Hand, George Walker quoted from the tune of Satin Doll. Satin Doll is a popular jazz piece which was written by Duke Ellington and Billy Strayhorn in 1953, with lyrics by Johnny Mercer. Here's how it sounds. Regarding Guido's hand, Dr. Walker said that he wanted to use the best of jazz, which is the elaboration of a tune. But you have to have a good melody to which to relate the embellishments. That creates the sense of structure. The melody of Satin Doll begins in the fourth bar after a playful atonal introduction using the octatonic scale. When the tune is first featured, this is the first moment in the piece where the music becomes tonal, using jazzy chord extensions in C major. Mixing between each melodic note, George Walker adds many jazz-like runs that stem from the octatonic scale. The last movement of Guido's hand is in ternary form, ABA, with a coda at the end. The first section of the movement, A, is a waltz in C major. The distinctive feature of this section is the chromatic thirds in the right hand. The second section, the B section of the movement, features atonal passages, which is followed by the return of the A section with a few embellishments. In the final measures of the movement, the opening theme from the first movement returns in triplets. Here is Guido's hand. Piano Sonata Number 5 is the final solo piano piece that George Walker composed. This sonata is unique in that it is the shortest of his sonatas, consisting of only one movement. The approach of this sonata is a culmination of his philosophy in composing. In speaking about the fifth piano sonata, he said, "I have a more traditional way of approaching composition. I believe that the very first notes that one chooses to use are important. Choosing the notes that are essentially going to provide momentum and character of the piece is always very important. It was my intent to write music that had a linear aspect because I thought that composers had pretty much exhausted all harmonic possibilities. I am now convinced that I have created for myself in some pieces a distinctive melodic vocabulary. Once I start out with an idea, I have this feel that what I write is going to be related, and it will be something that I do not want to change, so I move very slowly as I write." The basis for Piano Sonata Number 5 is the intervals, mainly seconds, thirds, sevenths, and ninths, as seen in the main theme of the opening measures. This 86-measure sonata, like other works of Dr. Walker, is without meter and contains varying tempo changes. In speaking about his aim for writing without a meter for this sonata, Dr. Walker said, "I aim in providing contrast with lyric motion that is fluid. Not simply the fact that I do not use meter indications. I have done that before. I wanted to create something that was fluid so that one does not get the sense of pulse. My music is not just shallow music in the usual sense. You have to understand that when I put in a rest, it is meaningful. You cannot just ignore it. Like when putting accents, I surprise myself when I occasionally look over a score and I say, 'Oh, I wasn't aware that I put in this accent, but I know that this is exactly what I wanted. I would not change that detail any more than changing a note on the score.'" The second theme of the sonata starts at the end of measure 18. This theme is also based on the interval of seconds. The development section is from measures 35 to 45. The development section contains important aspects of the style of Dr. Walker. In measure 37, he makes use of the octatonic scale. Another important feature of this sonata, which is common in the style of Dr. Walker, is the use of sustaining sonorities. In measure 40, the sustained sonority effect is used with the aid of pedal. In an interview with Reddy Lupa, Dr. Walker was asked about his approach to this sonority, to which he stated, "One thing that I have found, what I have objections to, and it is partly because, as much as I admire so much of Stravinsky's music, the dry sound in which things are not sustained is something that does not appeal to me. He has repetitions of things, this whole matter of to build up the tension to it and build up the sonorities. I wanted to do just the opposite. Sounds that are just sustained, that are superimposed in building up sonorities." The recapitulation occurs at the end of measure 45. The dynamic is fortissimo, and the sonorities that follow are larger with a thicker texture than the opening. Dr. Walker considers this return of the main theme as a ritornello with an intensification of the beginning. At the conclusion of the sonata, the established melodic motives of seconds and thirds are features. Here is the fifth sonata in its entirety. In consideration of the prominent composers of the 20th and 21st centuries, based on accolades and accomplishments, Dr. George Theophilus Walker should be celebrated. Black Americans have had to endure many adversities since the founding of America, and Dr. Walker had managed to excel to incredible distinction in the field of music despite the challenges. In his journey to reaching significant acclaim as a composer, Dr. Walker found his unique voice and developed a style that was intelligent and true to the principles of proper form and technique. Regarding Dr. Walker, composer Jeffrey Mumford said, "His music is always characterized by a great sense of dignity, which is how he always comported himself. His style evolved over the years. His earlier works, some written while still a student, embodied an impressive clarity and elegance." This sentiment of Jeffrey Mumford was the aim of my thesis. Dr. Walker's compositional style evolved throughout his career. From the beginning of his musical studies as a child, he sight-read contemporary music and developed a taste for what he liked. This was the beginning of his evolution. The next step to his evolution was when he improvised on an organ at the Oberlin Conservatory of Music to explore harmonic developments that were unusual to conclude. After he received official training in composition, Dr. Walker composed the Prelude and Caprice, where his approach to form was shown to be diverse from traditional styles, demonstrated by his unusual phrase lengths and frequent meter changes. His teacher from Oberlin, Norman Lockwood, emphasized writing a single vocal line, which evolved into Dr. Walker's emphasis on linear writing and clarity of voices. In the Caprice, there was a concealing of the tonic chord until the end of the music. This approach of Dr. Walker has evolved into a complete abandonment of tonality in his middle period, as seen in Spatials and later piano works. Dr. Walker's approach to the frequent change of meter eventually became the abandonment of meter, as seen in Spektra and the piano works that followed. In his late stage of piano compositions, all these features are present with other staples of Dr. Walker, such as sonorities and the full range of the piano being displayed. Thus, I have shared with you the evolution of the style of George Walker as seen through his piano music. Thank you.